How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk Guys. Today, we're going to talk about when victims speak, the impact of facing the guilty. I got a chance to watch the impact statements from the victims of the four who were murdered in the Bryan Kohberger case. And basically, the Gonsalveses, their impact statements are extremely powerful because they knew exactly who they were dealing with. They knew they were dealing with someone who was probably narcissistic, who was about their ego and pride, and they went in on that. They took total control, and I was very impressed by how they delivered it. To me, it was extremely impactful, powerful statements made. And there are some that look to forgive so they can let go of the hate and anger. So those are also powerful as well, because it takes a lot of courage to be able to step up and do that. But then I got to thinking, wow, based on who you are dealing with in front of you, that could affect what you may want to say. And that also affects what you get from it. Some will just look to do something that can help them move forward. And some will also look to do stuff to get at the individual, and that will also help them move forward. So when I was with my wife yesterday in New York City and the kids, there were some questions being sent my way just through the inbox saying, hey, Ganji, how can someone forgive someone who's done stuff like this? And do you see the monsters when they're not wearing their mask? What are they really like? And I said, you know what, maybe there could be a video created from this. So I watched the impact statements, and I put together some thoughts that I scripted here that I would like to read to you. I think there's some information here that I think you may, find valuable. And again, this is just insight. Now, granted, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not making any diagnosis here, but I'm going through experience. And I do have experience with dealing with these types of individuals. So I thought that maybe through that experience, I can share that and then basically give you better insight as to what I feel, affects an impact statement. So what I'm about to describe to you is one of the most emotionally charged moments in any courtroom, when the families of the victims speak directly to the person who took their loved ones away. In the Bryan Kohberger case, these weren't just statements. I noticed that they were confrontations, pleas, and moments of just raw humanity. Now, I would like to show you the videos. I found a good one that has them all, but I don't want to get the copyright strikes. So with that said, if you haven't seen the videos, I would definitely recommend seeing the videos first and then going back and checking out what I'm trying to provide here. So some also spoke to Kohlberger's ego. Others tried to reach his conscience, and a few simply needed to speak to be heard. So look at that balance there. There are some people that are going to try to see if he could be remorseful, which I don't think is the case. They know there's some that are going to attack that ego, attack that pride, because they know he's highly narcissistic. And there are some that are just going to go out there and just want to be heard, just to get stuff off their chest. And I find that to be the case with one of them, which I'll mention here, who made a beautiful statement about forgiveness. And I've actually seen this play out even in my world in corrections, where there were individuals who have committed crimes, and the loved ones who are most affected forgave them so they can move forward. And it's just a tremendous story of courage, but it makes us think like, wow, if they could forgive and they're the ones mostly affected, then what's stopping us? And it happens. It's just a strong sense of humanity that you may not see all the time on the outside world, but it happens every day, and it's usually done so the person affected can move forward. That's the key. I remember watching a story one time where there was a gang member who committed a murder, and basically it started playing out in his dreams, and he needed to do something about it. So the chaplaincy worked with him to reach out to the victim's mother, and they had to make sure that this was able to be done, because sometimes you're not able to do that. But she was very receptive in wanting to speak to him. And basically, this is someone that was a young man when he committed the crime. It was more based situational. He was involved in a gang. And I have a similar story like this as we progress later on as well, one of my own experiences. And basically, he took the life of another individual because the gang life kind of demanded that. And it's not an excuse, because this person wasn't looking for an excuse. He was just trying to provide context without minimizing his accountability. And then even in the process of him telling the story, somewhere along the line, because now this was an interaction that they actually had face to face, somewhere along the line, the mother had told him, listen, I've forgiven you a long time ago for what you've done. I had to in order to move on. And at the time, supposedly the mother and this inmate actually still communicated, even till he got released. And it was just a great story of some level of forgiveness or some level of humanity being found behind the prison wall. But again, that's not necessarily for this case. I just thought there's another perspective here. So, but here's what most people don't understand. When a victim's family stands at the podium, they're not just speaking to a courtroom. They're engaging in psychological warfare with someone who may or may not have the capacity to feel anything at all. And I think that's the case here. So let me tell you about a case that stayed with me for years. I was chairing a status review committee, and we had an inmate up for full minimum status. So full minimum status is basically your way down until you can get to community release. You have to kind of go through those processes, those steps. So he's been denied parole and was on his 29th year of a 30-year sentence for murder. This was his last shot at getting into a community release program before his time was up. The details of his crime were brutal. He's been selling drugs. He'd been selling drugs when someone tried to rob him. During the struggle, he got the upper hand, but instead of letting the guy run away, he shot him in the back, in his mind, cold blood, and no questions about it. Just did what I had to do. When I asked him if he had any regret, I watched this tough guy, someone who spent nearly 3 decades in the system, start to break down. But his answer caught me completely off guard. He didn't regret taking the guy's life. He said at that moment it felt like it was either going to be him or the robber. In the gang world that he came from, he had to make an example or people would keep coming for him. What hit me wasn't his justification for the killing. What hit me was what came next. He said he regretted living in a life where that choice was the only possibility he could see. His remorse wasn't about pulling the trigger. It was about every decision that led him to that moment where violence felt like his only option. That's brutal honesty. So that's what we look for in corrections, not excuses, not tears, ownership, real ownership of not just the act, but the path that led there. And that's kind of similar to the other story because it goes to show you that gang life, really about that pride and ego. In this case here, if he would have allowed the individual in his mind to not be addressed, then it would question his ability to be effective in his position. So this was truly pride-driven, ego-driven, but let's not deny the fact that it was also socially driven by his peers. This is what was accepted for him to do. This is what gave him his credentials, if you will. So it's kind of like a bastardized view of acceptance. Now, granted, some people, this may be all they know for acceptance. So with that said, as you get older and you start to see things a bit differently, which I think was the case for him, he realized all that stuff was superficial in the long run. So his biggest regret became the choices that he took to get to that time where that became a choice. And I thought that was extremely powerful. He wasn't someone trying to sell us some sob story or trying to fake ownership. Oh, yeah, I regret what I've done. And no, he basically was truthful. You know, it was either him or me, and in so many ways, not just if he posed a threat to me, but if I don't handle it, could I be taken out? So eventually, it's not even about that moment. It's about what led to the moment that made that a choice in my life to be made. And I never heard that before. So I thought that was extremely powerful. So we did give him full min status. He made it to the community programmings, and you know what? He never came back. So sometimes that belief in change pays off. But here's where the story gets more complicated. So that's someone that could be situationally driven to commit a crime. Again, not minimizing, just trying to provide perspective. And therefore, the situation isn't really about who they really are, but rather they are motivated through the pressure of the situation. In this case, peer pressure, fear was a big part of it too, possibly. And again, not to minimize their excuse, just bear with me. It's just more to provide a perspective. But then there are some people that cannot change. Like I think this person here was truly situationally driven. And again, they went out to the community. They never came back. It was one incident, a very powerful incident nonetheless, but one incident. I had Ann Salter on my show a while back. You guys should look it up. I did 2 episodes, one with her, one without. She has a great book out there called Predators, and she worked with sex offenders. And her perspective is a bit different when it comes to people changing in regards to that type of crime. So a while back, I interviewed Dr. Ann Salter for this show. She's a clinical psychologist who wrote Predators. So pedophiles, rapists, and other sex offenders. Dr. Salter has a PhD in clinical psychology from Harvard and has spent over 2 decades working with the worst of the worst, sex offenders and predators. She won the Significant Achievement Award from the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. And again, I highly recommend her book. Highly recommend you watch the interviews. Just make sure there's 2, one with me and a co-host, but then there is one with me and Ann Salter and my co-host. It's just the first interview we were going to do. She couldn't make it, and we were told at the last minute, so we went live anyway. And then later on, she came back on, and we had a great show. She's been on my show multiple times, but the one that you'll find on YouTube is a really good dialogue. So during our conversation, she told me something that was both profound and deeply disturbing. She believes that sex offenders and predators fundamentally cannot change. Not won't change, they just cannot change. Her objective, and the objective of most mental health professionals dealing with these cases, isn't rehabilitation, it's impulse control. Now think about that for a moment. Here's someone with decades of experience, someone who's built her career on understanding these individuals, and her professional conclusion is that the best we can hope for is managing their urges and not eliminating them. That conversation haunted me because it forced me to confront something I've been seeing in corrections but hadn't fully acknowledged. So we have program providers, chaplains, social services, different workers who run different programs for inmates. And they'll tell you straight up, there are people you can reach and people you cannot reach. But they keep trying anyway because it's about the effort, not controlling the outcome. The outcome isn't up for them to control. That's up to the individual. The effort is on us. And part of that effort also is understanding if the person's being sincere. How are they motivated? Are they motivated to do the right thing because they want to do the right thing, or are they motivated to do the right thing because it's going to look good on their parole report or whatever, external conditions? So that brings us to victim impact statements. Because when a family member stands up in court to confront their loved one's killer, they're facing the same terrible uncertainty. Are they speaking to someone who can feel genuine remorse? Someone like that inmate I described who could own his path and change it? And that matters. Or are they staring into the eyes of a predator who fundamentally is incapable of real empathy? The families in the Kohlberger case didn't know which type of monster they were facing, but they showed up anyway. And their approaches revealed something fascinating about the psychology of confronting evil. When Olivia Gonsalves, Kaylee's sister, stood up to speak, she didn't come with tears or desperate pleas. She came with surgical precision, targeting exactly what she thought would hurt him most. She looked directly at Kohlberger and said, "You aren't special or deep, not mysterious or exceptional. Don't get it twisted again. No one is scared of you today. No one is intimidated by you. No one thinks you are important." Body language experts watching this noted something crucial. Kohlberger started blinking rapidly. That's a physiological response he couldn't control, a sign of discomfort, of ego disruption. And that's very important. You have to know the context of who you're dealing with. That movement, the blinks, wasn't related to the fact that he was feeling remorseful, but rather she was getting at his ego. When someone who's built their entire identity around being this criminal mastermind gets called ordinary, pathetic, forgettable, that hits a bit differently. But Olivia wasn't done. She commanded him. She said, "Sit up straight when I talk to you." In that moment, she was asserting dominance in a space where he expected to maintain control. She was refusing to let him slouch in indifference while she honored her sister's memory. This is a guy, it's all about control, and she sit up when I'm talking to you. It was a powerful moment, at least for me. And then came the moment that brought the entire courtroom to applaud. If you hadn't attacked them in their sleep in the middle of the night, like a pedophile, Kaylee would have kicked your fucking ass. And that's pretty much what she said. Bear in mind, I think it's pretty much verbatim, but definitely double check the video just to make sure. But it was a powerful moment right after she said it. The people in the courtroom cheered. And again, it was more of a cheer of just getting that final remark off before she stepped away. And that was at the conclusion of what she said. So it was kind of like that last shot at his ego. The applause was loud, at least loud enough in the courtroom, because she wasn't just speaking for her family. She was speaking for everyone who wanted to call this coward exactly what he was, someone who could only win by attacking sleeping college students. Now, from my corrections experience, I can tell you this kind of direct challenge to someone's ego works on certain personality types. Narcissists especially cannot handle having their self-image destroyed in public. And Kohlberger's physical reaction suggested her words were finding their mark. Steve Gonsalves, Kaylee's father, took a completely different approach, but one that was equally powerful. He physically moved the podium to face Kohlberger directly. And this wasn't just breaking court protocol, it was forcing an unavoidable human confrontation. You try to plant fear, you try to divide us, you failed, he declared, staring directly into Kohlberger's eyes. Instead, your actions have united everyone in their disgust for you. I can tell you right now, the family definitely communicated together, I believe, into how they wanted to approach it, because they were very in sync. Even the mother, when she later spoke, was very in sync. Even the younger sister, who was able to leave a statement through the mother, was very in sync in what they were going after. They were going after this man's ego because they knew they would not get remorse from him. For the first time during the entire hearing, Kohlberger leaned back defensively. Body language experts called it a retreat response, maybe even shock, because Steve wasn't just speaking at him, he was speaking to him, human to human, forcing that connection Kohlberger probably desperately wanted to avoid. And I've been watching some body expert videos. It's funny because some of these body expert videos, they come out after the context is already there, and then they try to provide a picture. But I thought in this case here, what they were saying actually made a lot of sense. I'd rather actually try to see what people discover in the moment, as opposed to having all the information and then applying it backwards. But in this case here, I thought this applied very well from a few of the channels that I was watching to see what their thoughts were, because there was a lot of videos on these impact statements, and a lot of people were analyzing his reaction or lack of reaction. But then something completely unexpected happened. Again, this is with Steve and Bryan. Something that probably shook Kohlberger more than any insult or confrontation could. And it was Kim Kernoodle. Okay, so that's Zaina's mother. She stood up and offered him something no one saw coming, which was forgiveness. Now, I've seen this before. And when I was in the city yesterday, this is what kind of pushed for me to do this episode, was someone said, how could someone forgive him? And they're looking at it as if it's for him, and it's not for him. It's for them to be able to move forward. So the person affected is now, that forgiveness is so they don't move forward with hate. It's actually makes a lot of sense. It's their way of closing things out so they can move forward without hate or anger in their heart. So this is what she said. She said, Bryan, I'm here today to tell you that I have forgiven you because I can no longer live with that hate in my heart. It says it right there. The change in Kohlberger's posture was immediate. He slumped slightly, showing his first real signs of vulnerability during the entire proceeding. Because here's the thing about forgiveness that most people don't understand. Predators and narcissists have no idea how to process it. They're prepared for anger. They expect hatred, threats, calls for revenge. They can deflect that, dismiss it, even feed off it. But grace, mercy from someone they've destroyed, that completely disrupts their psychological framework. And obviously dealing with a few in my time, I 100% agree with that. I believe that they do something for those types of reactions. They want to push people on edge. And when they don't get that, it shakes them a bit. It bothers them a bit because they did not get the impact that they wanted, which usually is an impact of fear, hate, anger. They feed on that. So when someone says, I forgive you, and shows them some remorse, they don't know how to process that. 100%. That is 100% accurate. I've seen this dynamic play out in correction settings too. Some facilities bring victims of crimes in to address the inmate population, and I've watched these sessions work incredibly well for certain types of offenders. So people involved in domestic violence who know they have anger issues, individuals who committed what we call situational murders or drunk driving. I'll go into something with drunk driving later on. Again, these weren't people that planned on doing something in that moment, but may have been driven to it through pressure or however they perceived the pressure. Again, it's not excuses, just how they viewed the moment at that time and then acted without thinking, very impulsive. And then later on, they do get overwhelmed by the regret and, now being less impulsive, things that they could have done different. Again, it's not to minimize what they've done, but to let you know that these are people that have made some bad choices, but may not have been someone that was a bad person. Can we separate the two? Can we say someone that made a bad choice is not a bad person? That's a question that maybe you guys could answer here. But that's how we have to look at things in our world too, is that some people do make foolish choices, and unfortunately they have irreversible consequences. And then when they're faced with the reality of that consequence in the moment, all of a sudden the pressure is no longer there, and they start to feel the regret. They start to feel the remorse. And I've seen that. And I don't think it's fake. I think some of them are sincere. Like, I shouldn't have done that. I just acted impulsively, and unfortunately, this is the outcome, and I take full responsibility of it. And again, that's we call it situationally driven. Again, not to minimize, because the outcome is still a lost life, but it provides another perspective. And for someone like that, maybe it's not even about their ego or pride. Maybe it's about, the forgiveness, the remorse, trying to see if you can pull something out of them to let them understand the consequences. And for those of us that work in corrections, these are people that we could possibly change. We could teach them to work better with those impulsive behaviors so they don't commit to those actions again. Like, same thing with domestic violence. Again, not giving an excuse, just bear with me. It's just a perspective. They could be very impulsive. They can have anger concerns. So now we have to teach them how to mitigate those concerns, because maybe there is a level of guilt that they have for who they become in those moments. And how do we address that? How do we address that person? Because that person doesn't seem to be evil. That person just made a horrible choice that led to some serious consequences. And again, not minimizing, because there's going to be people from here that are affected by individuals like that. Like, again, you're giving excuses. I'm not. You do wrong, you do wrong. I'm very big on accountability. But from our mind, some of these excuses are supposed to be justifications that we can work with. I can't work with excuses and move people forward, but I can work with justifications. And usually people that are driven through the situation may find some level of remorse that, you can maybe create some real change with if they take ownership of that action and be willing to move forward and address the problem at a root cause. So we're talking about people involved in domestic violence. They have anger issues, individuals who committed what we call situational murders, crimes that happen in a moment of rage or desperation rather than calculated evil. These victims provide perspective, help the incarcerated understand the real effects of their actions. I've seen grown men break down completely when a victim's family member looks them in the eyes and describes the ongoing impact of their crime. Some facilities do have a thing called like focus on the victim, where they bring in victims of people who have been affected by crimes, and they speak to individuals who have done those crimes, domestic violence, murder, drunk driving, all that stuff. And they let people know of the consequences of that behavior and the ripple effect. And it does affect people. It could have a big effect on people that have committed those crimes, because they may not be aware of those consequences because they don't care at that point. But then when they have a chance to kind of think through things, they start to see things differently. I mean, I know people may think, wow, Ganj, this should be common sense. Not always, because sometimes the world that they live in is a lot different than the world that we live in. And we have to remind them of that difference and see if there is a sense of humanity there. And some people have it, and unfortunately, some people don't. Some people will take those focus on the victims because they know they need it, because they know they want to be better. And some people will just take it because it looks good on their record. And then it's up for us to determine who deserves it. And even though we have to see everyone who deserves it at this point, and who can wait. So, but sadly, there are also some who just don't care. They go through the motions, check the boxes because they know completing programs looks good for parole boards, and move to the next step. At the end of the day, we cannot choose how it impacts them. That's on them. That's effort over outcome, right? And that's the reality these families face when they step up to their podium. So this is, again, going back to the victim impact statements. They don't know if they're speaking to someone with the shred of humanity left or the complete void. Working in corrections, we see what the public doesn't. We see beyond the mask. Sometimes people who present as tough are just hiding vulnerabilities. Sometimes people who seem vulnerable are monsters underneath. But eventually, when they're in the system long enough, the mask comes off. The program providers, the chaplains, the social service workers, they know which inmates they can reach and which ones they can't. They keep trying anyway because they understand something fundamental. They can't control the outcome, only their effort. But Dr. Ann Salter's research forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. For certain type of offenders, as said before, particularly sexual predators, that capacity for genuine change, for real empathy, may simply not exist. The wiring might be fundamentally different. And I see Kohlberger as a predator. I see Wade Wilson as a predator. I mean, I've talked about him in the past before. These are people that you just there's something wrong with them, and you just cannot. You'll still make the effort to try and change them. At the end of the day, you may have to accept the fact that they just cannot. Even if they wanted to, they just can't. So when families like the Gonsalves stand up to confront someone like Kohlberger, they're not just seeking justice. They're not trying to rehabilitate him. They're declaring that their loved ones mattered, that evil actions have consequences, that even in the darkest moments, human dignity can still shine through. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against evil isn't trying to reach the monster's heart. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be silenced. But there's another layer to this that I think is crucial to understand. When we talk about victim impact statements, we're really talking about two different purposes, and they don't always align. It's kind of what I touched on earlier. The first purpose is therapeutic, giving families a voice, a chance to be heard, a way to process their trauma and begin healing. The second purpose is impact on the offender, hoping to create accountability, remorse, maybe even change. And when I was doing this, putting the show together, that's how I broke it down. I took some thoughts of what am I looking to accomplish if I was providing a statement. And when I went back and looked at the videos from the Kohlberger's victim impact statements, I saw some strong approaches by the Gonsalves family. But then I saw the one lady letting the inmate know, or letting Kohlberger know she forgives him. So I saw another reaction to that. It was more about her, which was then definitely something that was powerful as well. So I said, okay, so that's one avenue. But then I was like, well, then now let's go back and rewatch the videos again. And this is where I started to look at videos with body language and stuff and said, well, let's see how he receives it. So now I'm not so much focused on the people giving the message, but let me hear it in the background. But let me see what he reacts to. And at this point here, I did agree with some of the videos that were breaking it down contextually. I did agree with, especially his reactions to the Gonsalves family and them going after his ego. I felt that that hit him pretty good. The forgiveness thing, I think I like the fact that he was a bit confused, didn't know how to process that, wasn't expecting that. Again, they're expecting a different reaction. But I thought that was interesting to watch. If you guys ever get a chance to watch the video again, you should look at that. I mean, really pay attention. And now we have a little bit more knowledge to reevaluate those videos. Because in some cases, believe it or not, for someone that's narcissistic, it's either win-loss. There's no middle. So I'll guarantee you, if there was a chance for the Kohlberger to speak back, he wouldn't be like, yes, you're right, especially to the ones that are attacking his ego. He would probably go right back at them. So again, this is someone that probably I think is not capable of remorse. So as I mentioned, the first purpose is therapeutic. Let's see, giving families a voice, a chance to be heard, a way to process their trauma and begin healing. The second purpose is impact to the offender, which I read, hoping to create accountability, remorse, maybe even change. Here's what I've learned from years in the system. These two purposes can work independently. A family can find healing and closure from giving a statement, even if it doesn't touch the offender at all. And sometimes an offender can be genuinely affected by words that the family spoke purely for their own therapeutic needs. Take Kim Knudel's forgiveness of Kohlberger. She wasn't forgiving him to help him heal or find redemption. She explicitly said it. I can no longer live with that hate in my heart. That forgiveness was for her survival, Her ability to move forward, the fact that it's visibly affected Kohlberger was almost secondary. This wasn't what she wanted. She just wanted to get it out there and move forward. This is something, by the way, it takes tremendous courage to do. So bravo for Kim to do that. This is something people struggle to understand about forgiveness in these situations. They ask, how can you forgive a monster? Doesn't that let them off the hook? But forgiveness isn't about the offender deserving mercy. It's about the victim refusing to let anger and hatred poison the rest of their life. I remember one victim's family members who came to speak at our facility. Her son had been killed by a drunk driver who was serving time with us. She told the inmates, I forgive him not because he deserves it, but because carrying that hatred was killing me from the inside. My son died once. I wasn't going to let this destroy what was left of my family. And I remember this, being able to watch one of the focus of the victims being carried out the program. And I remember her saying this, and that stuck with me. It resonated with me. I mean, that's pretty much almost verbatim what she said. That's how powerful that was for me when I was listening to that statement. Again, how the inmates reacted to that. At that point, the room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Some of those men were crying. But here's the thing. She wasn't there to make them cry. She was there because speaking those words out loud was part of her own healing journey. But now I want to talk about the other side of the equation. How do different types of offenders actually process these confrontations? So in my experience, you can broadly categorize these reactions to several types. There are those who show genuine remorse, like that inmate I mentioned earlier who regretted the path that led to his crime. And I think in his mind, that was true remorse. I think that he knew honestly, he couldn't say he regretted it or else he wouldn't be alive. He knew somewhere along the line, it wasn't even just about ego or pride, but that he would be either pounced on by his own gang or this person would have taken him out. But he knew that feeling of regret was there somewhere. And he later deep dived and said it was the regret of making that a choice, like the life that I led that to be a choice. So these are often people who committed what we call crimes of circumstance or passion. I said situational. They retain the capacity for empathy, for understanding the human cost of their actions. And guys, that is key when it comes to us changing people in corrections. We look for them to have some level of empathy, and that comes from some level of ownership. Yeah, there are people that own it for pride reasons. Yeah, I did it. Yeah, I'm the one that did it. Don't take claim of that. I'm the one that, and again, relate to prior ego, but there's some people that take onus of it for the right reasons because they know they have to truly make change. And they know the only way to do that is to address it at its root. And again, it doesn't come from excuses of why you did it. It comes from taking ownership of why it was done and what you need to do to change yourself to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the hard part about that too, for many, is it comes with embracing the consequences of those actions. I mean, truly now stepping out and looking at yourself in a totally different way. And that's why we have people there that can help them through it, because it could be very uncomfortable. So we have people to help the inmates find that path and then safely guide them through it so they come do something beneficial at the end. Because if they do it alone and they really go into this deep dive, if you're not there to help them through it, the consequences of what they could do themselves could be extremely damaging. So again, it's something that is a very controlled effort, but it's something that they need to connect with in order to honestly move forward. And that's why we have our professionals there to help them through it. So again, there are people that could have some remorse. Okay, but then there are also those that show calculated emotional response. They cry at the right moments, nod their heads, maybe even apologize, but it's all performance. They learned with what reactions get them positive evaluations, what behaviors make them look reformed. These are often the most dangerous because they're skilled manipulators. And guys, us in corrections, we can kind of recognize who those people are, because like the emotion doesn't connect with what they should be feeling. Maybe it's a little too much or a little bit after. It just doesn't connect, doesn't align. And in our business, we kind of recognize it through our gut feeling first. It may not even be something we can automatically explain, but we're like, man, something doesn't align right with that individual. I know they look like they're going through all these motions, but it's not resonating with me. It's like they're going through the motions just to go through the motions. It's like seeing a play and they're all burned out and they're just going through the scenes just to go through the scenes when you're like, wow, there's no commitment here. So I think, again, for us, we, listen to our feelings and sense something, and that actually helps us with who's genuine and who's not. But again, there are some people that have perfected it as well, and they're a little bit harder to read. And then there's a fourth category that's particularly disturbing: those who seem to feed off the pain. And I've seen that. I think Wade Wilson would fall into that a little bit. They enjoy hearing about the suffering they've caused. For these individuals, victim impact statements can actually be counterproductive, giving them exactly what they want, evidence of their power to destroy lives. The challenge for families is that they usually don't know which type they're dealing with until they're standing at their podium, looking into the eyes of the person who destroyed their world. Let me tell you about another case that illustrates the complexity. So as I was looking up victim impact statements, I ran into a couple older ones. One was Jeffrey Dahmer's. And I thought something was unique here. So Jeffrey Dahmer's sentencing hearing is probably one of the most emotionally explosive victim impact statements in legal history. So the lady's name was Rita Isbell, I believe. She's the system of victim Errol Lindsay. And guys, I don't claim to be an expert in these things. I'm just doing my research in the moment and drawing from that moment. So if you guys know more, please add. She actually charged towards Dahmer, screaming, "I hate you, motherfucker." It required multiple deputies to restrain her. But here's what's fascinating. Dahmer's attorneys later revealed that his client was genuinely affected by that confrontation. Dahmer allegedly said, and this is what I read, "You can't blame her. She's right." That raw, unfiltered rage seemed to pierce through his psychological defense in a way that clinical testimony never could. So basically, he expected her to be that. So again, it doesn't say he's remorseful, but just that's what he expected. He expected people to react in that fashion. So again, doing something a little off kilter of what Kim did with Kohlberger was something that he probably wouldn't have expected and wouldn't know how to process it. And then I did Larry Nassar, who complained to the court that listening to over 150 victim statements was too hard for him. Here was someone so narcissistic that he was more concerned about his own discomfort than the trauma he caused hundreds of young athletes. So again, they're getting ready to play the victim statements, and he doesn't want to hear because I just can't go through it. So I thought that says a lot about him as well. No remorse there. He was just more concerned about himself, even after he went through the process of, hey, you're guilty of this. And he just, nope, I don't want to hear it. Too uncomfortable for me. That's not remorse. Taking ownership is hearing how you affected those that you affected. So the difference between these reactions tell us something important about the spectrum of evil we're dealing with. Dahmer, for all his horrific crimes, retained some capacity to understand the human cost of his actions. Nassar was purely focused on himself, even in the face of overwhelming evidence of the pain he caused. That is why Dr. Salter's work is so important. She identified that sexual predators, in particular, often lack this basic capacity for empathy. They're not just choosing to ignore the pain they cause. They literally cannot process it the way normal people do. I remember her telling me that they see people as objects and objects to be replaced. You know, I mean, to be able to do something, let's say to a child, someone that's the weakest, the most vulnerable, and not have a care in the world about it. And she goes, that's because they're objects. They're objects to them that can be replaced. Serial killers, they're objects. They meet an end, and who cares? I move forward. That's how they view things. So there's no empathy. There's no room for empathy in that. They can't see someone above being an object, and in their mind, objects are replaceable, and it serves their need. It serves their function. It puts them at a higher level, and everything else is subordinate to what their needs are, even if that fulfillment is sexual or anything predatory in nature. That is why Dr. Salter's work is important. I read that. So where does this leave families who are deciding whether to give a victim impact statement? I think the answer is both simpler and more complex than people realize. The simple part, do it for yourself, not for them. Speaking those words will help you heal. If confronting your loved one's killer will give you some sense of agency in a situation where you felt powerless, then do it. Don't worry about whether you're reaching them or changing them. The complex part now is, again, for the complexity part of it all, understand that you might be dealing with someone who's fundamentally different from you, someone who doesn't process emotion, empathy, or human connection the way you do. And that's not your failure. It's their pathology. Me and Russ talk about this a lot, about criminological mindset. It's a lot different than when we see things. So you can't relate to them as you see the world. They see the world totally different. And if you try to relate to them as you see the world, especially in correction, that's how they start to manipulate you, because you're automatically looking for something that may not be there. That's the key. So again, when you're looking to create these statements, I love the thing that it's about you, what you need to accomplish. It's about what you need to accomplish. Because if you're looking to do something, expecting it to affect them, because that's how it would affect you, you don't think like they do, and you don't want to think like they do. So I think that's pretty good insight. Olivia Gonsalves understood this intuitively. When she told Kohlberger he wasn't special, when she commanded him to sit up straight, she wasn't trying to rehabilitate him. She was declaring that her sister's life had value, that Kaylee was worth defending even in death, and that this pathetic coward would not have the last word in her sister's story. And that's incredibly powerful, regardless of how Kohlberger processed it. I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier about the programs we run in corrections. When we bring victims in to speak to inmates, we see the full spectrum of these reactions play out in real time. I remember a chaplain, again, I want to revisit something with the focus on the victim program. I remember a chaplain telling me there was one session where a mother whose teenage daughter had been killed by a drunk driver, and they came to speak. All right, so similar situation. She wasn't angry, which seemed to catch the inmates off guard. She was heartbroken, but she spoke with this quiet dignity about who her daughter was and what she'd lost, how the family had struggled to rebuild their lives. One inmate serving time for vehicular manslaughter broke down completely. He never really understood the ripple effects of his crime until that moment. He started attending every victim impact session we offered, or they offered, and then began writing letters to his own victim's family, asking not for forgiveness, but just to acknowledge their pain. And by the way, there is a process where they can do that. They just have to go through a process to get it approved, and if the victim's family will allow for that communication, because that could be a tremendous part of healing for both parties. But not all people are allowed that. Some people are not allowed to have any contact with the victims. But in this case here, they allowed it because they believed the person had his own demons, and that a way for him to address those demons would be to communicate with the victims' families, and the victims' families was okay with that because they don't believe that this person was naturally a bad person. They believe he got caught in a situation where drinking got the best of him. But in the same room, and that takes a lot of courage on their end too. I don't know if I'd be able to do that. But in that same room was another inmate who sat stone-faced through the entire presentation. Afterwards, he made jokes about it to other inmates. For him, the session was just something to endure, a box to check off for his program requirements. Same words, same story, same emotional power, completely different reactions based on the fundamental wiring of the individuals hearing them. This is the reality that victim impact statements exist within. They're powerful tools for healing and justice, but they're not magic. They can't create empathy where none exists, can't install a conscience in someone who was born without one. Another great book by Robert Harris, Without a Conscience, by the way, you should check out that book. About sociopaths, I believe, and psychopaths, probably both. But they serve another purpose that I think is just as important. They bear witness. They ensure that victims aren't forgotten, that their stories are told, that their humanity is affirmed in the face of evil that try to erase them. And there's one more aspect of this I want to address, and it might be controversial. So sometimes I wonder if we put too much pressure on families to forgive, to find closure, to somehow transcend their plan in these public moments. Not every family chooses to give a victim impact statement, and that's completely valid. There was someone from the Gonsalves family who refused to go up. I think it was the brother, and he refused to go up or just didn't want to go up. I think he felt that maybe it was already being handled, and he chose to maybe handle his own grief inwards. So some families find that facing their loved one's killer would be re-traumatizing rather than healing. Others worry that giving the offender any attention, even negative attention, might feed into their pathology. And some families aren't ready to forgive, aren't interested in understanding the killer's psychology, and just want them locked away forever. And that's also completely valid. The justice system should support whatever choice helps families heal, not push them towards responses that look good on television or satisfy our collective need for redemption narratives. At the end of the day, victim impact statements reveal something profound about human nature. In our darkest moments, when we've been touched by unthinkable evil, we still reach for connection, for meaning, for the assertion that love and dignity matter more than violence and hatred. And that's where these families, to me, also become inspiration for those that are watching it. If I had to go through a loss as severe as that, those impact statements from those families are truly powerful. The father, the daughter, Steve and Olivia, I believe is her name. Olivia, yeah. The way they talk about unity and that this united us. I mean, to find some type of strength and some type of purpose in this horrible situation, it's just powerful. to me. I don't know if I would be able to do that. And that is something that if God forbid something happened to me, I would be looking at that video saying, man, if they can do it, I can do it. Because even in the darkest of times, there's got to be a light that you can find if you just so you can move on. And they found that light, they found that purpose, and that will keep them motivated to hopefully maybe create some profound change, because people will listen to them. People will listen to those that have been affected, because I know if they can do it, then so can I. It's just a powerful outreach. Hold on. So whether that reaches the person who caused the harm is almost beside. So where was that? So I got lost in that moment. Okay, so I said for the meaning, for the assertion that love and dignity matter more than violence and hatred. Whether that reaches the person who caused the harm is almost besides the point. The act of speaking, of refusing to be silenced, of declaring that our loved one matters, that's an act of resistance against evil itself. When I think about Kohlberger's case, what stays with me isn't his reaction to the statements. It's the courage of those families to stand up and speak truth in the face of evil. It's Olivia's fierce protection of her sister's memory. It's Steve's refusal to let protocol prevent him from looking his daughter's killer in the eyes to remove that podium. It's Kim's choice to free herself from hatred. These moments of human dignity in the face of inhuman cruelty, that's what victory looks like, regardless of whether the monster in the defendant's chair is capable of understanding it. Now, again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever wondered what you'd say if you were in their position? Do you think forgiveness is always healing, or can it sometimes be harmful? And what do you make of the idea that some people are simply unreachable? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found the analysis helpful, consider checking out my previous interviews with Dr. Anna Salter, where we dive even deeper into the psychology of predators and criminal minds. Until next time, remember, I'll put this story here. Evil exists, but so does the human capacity to rise above it. Well, that's a balanced statement there. As always, guys, stay safe and see you soon.